On today's episode of Faith and Frames, we're going to talk about some things that we've learned with starting our podcast over the last 30-ish episodes and some tips on helping you get yours started.
Yeah, so let's pivot into the tips, right? So things we've learned. Gosh. Well, I guess the biggest one would be we talked about it. We wanted to do one for a long time. For various reasons, we stopped. Actually, we didn't stop. That implies that we started.
Never started.
We just didn't start. So it kept
time.
us from starting, right? Yeah. It kept us from hitting record, uploading the first episode, all of these things. I think a lot of people have this fear that either A, people aren't going to want to listen to them, which is possible.
Yeah, certainly possible. Actually, very probable.
B, they're like, I need all this gear to get this. Once I get all this gear and a little bit of skills, then I can start my podcast. Yeah. Well, no, just don't overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Again, what you need to start a podcast is a way to record your voice.
Yes.
That's it. You've got you have a voice recording apparatus in your pocket all the time.
Yeah. And listen, if you don't have a cell phone for whatever reason in 2024, get yourself a dad burn handheld recorder, whatever it is. Just record that voice somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't have to inundate yourself with gear. I know it's easy for us to sit here and say this because we're in the industry. Obviously, we work with gear every day. But at the basis, if all of this were to burn up in some way, shape, or fashion, and all I had was my phone, I could still get my podcast rolling, or I could still continue my podcast. And so can you if you're starting for the first time. So don't inundate yourself with gear.
And I guess the other tip that I would say is, obviously I mentioned that I think a lot of people have failure to launch for fear of, well, I don't have anything interesting to say. Nobody's going to listen. First off, don't underestimate the power of social media, right? I know the algorithms can get a bad rap and in some cases can be extremely frustrating for various reasons, but they're also pretty good,
at finding
specifically
your people.
YouTube, at finding the people who are interested. Yeah. You may have a desire to start a podcast specifically talking about, I don't know, potatoes and best potato practices.
And all starch-related content.
All starch-related content. Guess what? People, truly, as wild and mundane as that seems.
You got some tater lovers.
I love taters.
I love taters.
But you've got there's an audience for that.
Well, I'll give you one close to home. One of our good friends, Melissa Hankins, who's also been a guest on this podcast, hint, hint, going back to network.
Yep.
One of her sisters, one of her 47 sisters, actually has a TikTok page that's dedicated to like Lord of the Rings lore.
Okay.
And I mean that's it.
Well, that's very niche specific.
Very niche, but she has a massive following. Now, obviously that's not a podcast, but that just goes back to
she
algorithms.
Can make it one.
She can make it one, but the algorithms found her people. I want to say her TikTok page, and Melissa, you can correct me if I'm wrong if you're listening. I think it's like 70K plus followers.
Dang.
For Lord of the Rings lore. Now, that's not something that I'm into specifically, but
guess
there's
what?
70,000 other people out there that are.
Clearly, there are others that are.
There are others that are.
And that are also.
So yeah, don't underestimate the power of social media, and again, it having a global reach beyond your four walls.
Yeah. So another tip I would give you is literally just tailing off of that blunder. Let it be. Let it be conversational. Let it be raw. This is the best thing for me with a podcast is there is such a low pressure to it.
Yeah.
To be polished. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I really don't think you could fill the air with 40 minutes of just gabs.
No.
That's probably not going to be good for many people, but
I'm going to leave some blunders.
Oh, well, I mean,
I think guys just heard a blunder. I ain't cutting it out. I don't care.
I think people really enjoy seeing those bits.
I don't give a heck.
They understand that that's a human. And you know what? We don't always speak with 100% accuracy,
especially in the South.
especially in the South. We're doing good to even get the English that we get out.
And to reiterate, I don't even give a heck.
Well, I don't even know where that come from. But so yeah, let it be conversational. And so if you want to start a podcast, which I know a lot of people do, I think a lot of people have failure to launch, paralysis by analysis, all these things. But here is a great way to kind of wade into the water, tip your toes, try it out.
This might be the best tip.
Go be a guest.
Boom.
More than once.
Boom.
Go be a guest on a podcast.
Like 20 times.
Like 20 times. I mean, if you have a desire to start a podcast, and you're like, I just don't know if I think I can do it. Maybe my story's not that good. Maybe I don't have enough value to offer. First off, you probably do.
You do.
Second off, a great way to start honing that in and to start really just kind of getting that practice and those reps in.
Tell that story.
Go be a guest on a podcast.
Many times.
Yes.
I read a thread on Threads
interesting.
From a guy who was speaking to that very point. He said, go be a guest on a podcast before you even start your own, which is probably advice we probably should have taken. But anyways.
You showed me that. He said 10.
Yeah, he said, go be a guest on 10 podcasts.
A metric to it.
And there's a couple different reasons for that. We were mentioning this in I'm going to call it a mastermind group.
Yep.
That we're definitely not the masters of the minds, but
we're just minds present. Maybe.
We're in a group with a lot of smart people. And there was a guy in our group saying, what are some ways that I can get into this new niche? He's wanting to get into like Etsy and things like that with what he does, specifically podcasting. And we literally recommend going and being a guest, because when you're a guest on a podcast, you're not having to think of new subject matter all the time. The only piece of subject matter that you truly have to hone is that one story of yours.
Yep.
And you're able to reach out to other podcasts saying, hey, here's my story. Here's what I would like to tell your audience. If this is something that you jive with, you vibe with, you ride with, whatever you want to call it. Whatever. You can do that. And that's the only thing that you have to tell at that point in time.
Yeah.
Until your comfort level gets up.
Right.
But also, too, going back to the very beginning of this episode, you are telling that story to networks that you, on any other occasion, would probably not have the ability to get in front of.
Yeah. And so here's how it's worked every single time that we've ever been a guest. We do this with our guests. Guess what gets attached in the show notes? Your social media accounts. Right? Right? Ways that people can further follow you if they desire to, right? So here's the cool thing. Like, say you did, in fact, become a guest on 10 podcasts. That's 10 people who maybe there's some overlap in audience, maybe there's not, but let's just say that there's not. There's 10 groups of audiences that are now privy to who you are. They've heard your story. You know what? Maybe they were compelled, and now maybe they're a follower on some sort of social media. So here's the benefit to that. If you do desire to start your podcast after becoming a guest, you already have a pretty good little nucleus of people who are A, already consuming podcasts, B, enjoyed
like you,
and enjoyed hearing you on a podcast. So
it's an audience that's willing to migrate.
Yeah, that's already a very warm, most likely podcast listener right there.
Well, yeah,
when you start your show.
Yeah, and let's just average it out. Let's say on average, those 10 podcasts that you're on have 5,000 listeners. That's 50,000 listeners just on the podcasting platforms. That doesn't count social medias or anything like that, but just 5,000 listeners.
Yeah.
That is 50,000 new people, 100,000 ears that you just gained access to.
Unless they're, Vincent Van Gogh?
Yeah, unless they've had one chopped off.
Peter chopped one off.
Yeah.
God put it back on, though.
Hey.
Jesus.
Cupped her back on. So you're accessing those networks going all the way back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Be a guest. And I do. I think that helps people with comfort levels, because here's the thing. It's kind of hard. I mean, I know me and you do it, and we've been doing it for a while now, but like, it's kind of hard to hold a conversation.
I wouldn't say we do it well, but yeah, it is.
Yeah. It's hard to hold a conversation. Yeah. We struggle on this podcast at times to hold conversation.
Yeah.
So being a guest on one, I believe, certainly helps with the comfort levels there, and just helps with the experience level, getting your repetitions in.
Yeah. I mean, if I go back, take the visual elements completely out. I know we've changed lighting, all these things, camera angles. Take all of that out. If we just look at dialogue, conversation, just quality of conversation back to our first few episodes.
Yeah. It's laughable.
It's laughable. Now, we're still learning.
Yeah. Some of our recent episodes are still laughable.
But like it's so much more easy now that we've got 30-ish. Now that we've got 30-ish episodes. Well, that's 30-ish practices.
Yeah, that's repetitions.
So things are going to become a little easier because I mean, it can still be intimidating hitting record, talking to I don't know, who knows how many people or maybe nobody's listening. But like it's not natural, you know?
Yeah.
But if you keep it conversational and you just naturally let things flow, that's going to help a lot too.
Yeah. I'll throw I'm going to give you a BB here. Well, this would be a BT, a bonus tip, because we've already done bonus benefits. Bonus tip is I'm just going to say also watch different podcasts.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, don't watch so many to where you're inundated with, information and inundated with being a consumer.
Yeah.
That's certainly a trap that can be fallen into. Nobody gained a massive chest or biceps by doing nothing but watching Mike O'Hearn and Arnold Schwarzenegger videos.
True.
You eventually have to hit the gym. Same thing with a podcast. I think it's great to do some research, maybe on whatever niche you're trying to podcast within, but also you've got to start creating at some point in time.
Yeah.
But it's good to have examples of things that are working that you can then give your voice on.
Yeah. Start. Literally just start, because, the old saying of the best time to start a YouTube channel was yesterday.
Yeah,
well,
yesterday.
You can't go back and do yesterday. So the next best time
today
is today.
Today.
And here's the thing. I always like to use the reference of Michael Jordan, who most people would say is the GOAT. The greatest of all time. At some point, that boy had never even dribbled a basketball.
Very true. Actually, up until like high school.
At some point.
Yeah, or middle school.
Yeah, at some point, he had never picked up a basketball. He then, through
became the greatest.
Tons of practice, reps, became the greatest of all time. So you don't become the greatest if you never actually pick up the basketball.
And I think actually recently, statistic that I've seen, amongst his peers and amongst players in the league, I believe 54% of NBA players say that he's the GOAT.
Wow.
Yeah, 54% compared to 46% for Mr. LeBron.
Well, I mean, the point is like, even if you think LeBron's the best, that's fine. That's your opinion. I'm not going to sit here and argue. That's not what this podcast is.
And if you want to start a podcast for that, that's great. There's people that'll listen.
Yeah, there is.
Even though they're wrong, they'll let. No, I'm just kidding.
At some point, LeBron nor MJ had ever picked up a basketball.
Right.
That's my point.
Yeah.
You can't become their level of greatness if you never start.
Very true.
So start.
Yes.
Also, I will caution this: growth and success, as we mentioned earlier, is relative.
Yeah, subjective. Yep,
very subjective. And so I will say this: unless you already have a big following on other platforms, growth may be slow.
Yeah,
growth may be slow. And so just remember that these pieces are evergreen. They are discoverable. The work that you're doing today can reward you next year, for the next 5 years. All these things. Just be of the mindset that it may be a slow grow.
Yeah, understand that you're not Travis and Jason Kelce.
That's a great example, right? New Heights. I don't know how many monthly listeners they have.
A Brazilian.
They have a lot. But if they weren't the figures that they were already, two professional NFL players with great success, their growth on their podcast probably would not have been, I'm sure they would have eventually grown because they're entertaining folk, but it wouldn't have started at that level and accelerated at that point.
Well, and you mentioned off camera, even like Doug Dynasty.
Yeah, Unashamed. It's one of my favorite podcasts, right? Like I think Phil, Jason, and Al would have had a tougher time with reaching the level of growth that they currently have had they not had the fan base and the following that they already had.
They would have eventually grown the following because that's just what happens through the law of averages. But slower growth for sure. Because they're at the end of the day, they are entertaining dudes. They're hilarious.
Absolutely.
Very knowledgeable on the Bible, especially. So they definitely cater to anyone wanting to know good theology. But yeah, like had they not had their platform already from Doug Dynasty, probably would have been a slower grow even for them.
So I will just try to encourage you that when you do start, I think a lot of people, actually I heard a statistic, I forget the number, but
10 episodes.
don't make it past 10
Yeah,
episodes,
10
right?
episodes.
And I can understand why, because growth has been slow. And in some cases, I even knew growth would be slow, but it's been slower than what I would have thought, right? But you've got to understand the long game. That is what a podcast is.
Yeah.
Now, another tip that I would give you on that specific note, be as efficient as you possibly can.
Yes.
Because it can be a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
It can take a lot of time. It really can. So be as efficient as you can. We've talked about it before. Batch shoot, right?
Yeah.
Shoot a couple, 2, 3 episodes, whatever your cusp of before you start to dip in quality. Maybe you never start with quality.
And literally do it on your phone.
Yeah.
Do it on your phone.
Yeah. Just don't let that slow growth that's pretty likely to occur. Now you may be what's her name? Bobby, Alpha, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
She was in
interviews
Overnight
people.
podcast success, but
that's because she interviewed Drake.
so unless you're going to interview Drake,
Or
probably
another similar figure.
going to have a slow growth. Just be aware of that. Be aware of that. Be okay with that. Understand that the long game is worth it.
Don't let that stop you. Don't let equipment stop you.
Oh, yeah, the equipment. That's a good one. That's a really good one. So, obviously, if you've been a guest on our podcast, I think we've shown a little bit of BTS.
Yeah. We have quite a large setup.
Video, right? We bring C-stands in. We bring mic stands in, lights.
But that's because we want to. Like, we don't have to.
No, we do not have to. And
you don't have to.
We could simplify this a lot. We've seen far simpler setups, right? Even in person, we've seen simpler setups.
Some of them look very attractive because it's less work to set up.
Well, I'll tell you this too. Another great option that I think a lot of people may be aware of, maybe they're not, is software like Riverside.
Yeah.
So so that's a great,
especially if you're having guests.
Oh, that's a great guest platform because here's the thing. We really enjoy setting these things up, bringing a guest in, micing them up, getting them a camera angle because it's what we do.
Well, and it's fun for us. It's kind of like big Legos.
But that requires
a lot of work, a lot of coordination.
Scheduling of
a lot of coordination.
Time, right? They've also got to be here in person, all of these things. Whereas like a Riverside, it literally feels like a Zoom call.
Yeah.
And you can be interviewing a podcast guest in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah. So you talk about efficiency.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about efficiency. My goodness.
Not only efficiency, but think about that. You're now tapping into
Portland,
somebody's following that probably is heavily based in Portland, Oregon.
If you desire to be in Portland, Oregon, yes.
Well, my point is like wherever, right? Like so that is another great tip is don't let gear be a caveat. If you desire to have a video podcast, start with your laptop.
Yeah.
Right? Laptops have a webcam. We're so conditioned seeing Zoom calls and stuff as a result of COVID. Like it's totally sufficient.
Well, again, gear doesn't have to be a caveat. It can actually be a catalyst. You just mentioned Riverside.
Absolutely.
That's technology that's available to you and I as consumers that you can literally interview somebody anywhere in the whole entire world.
Yes. We've been a guest on Riverside. And actually that was a pretty,
again,
talking about simplicity. I wrapped up with that after we hit cut or called cut. And I was like, dang.
I didn't even have pants on for that interview. Well, I'm just kidding. I did.
I had pants on, but nobody would
have to have pants on.
Didn't have to.
I did. Kind of subconscious, like you probably need pants, dude.
Didn't have to set up lights, any of those things. So, like, just don't let gear or a lack thereof overcomplicate it and become a barrier. Because starting a podcast doesn't have to be that way.
No, it's actually pretty easy.
Yeah,
pretty easy to start one.
When you start it, guess what? There are paid platforms that you can host it with, but there are also free platforms. You can use places like Spotify. It's still free to upload to YouTube.
I was going to say YouTube, still my favorite. Even for podcasts.
Absolutely. So just don't overcomplicate it. Don't be paralyzed by your lack of gear.
I like that.
I've heard several people tell me, hey, you know what? I've wanted to start a podcast.
I don't have a camera.
I just don't have a good way of doing it. And, I don't know. Several people have even told me that they listen to a podcast. I'm like, well, good gosh, you've already got a pot of listeners right there.
Yeah.
they're asking you to start a podcast.
Oh, and you just bought the new iPhone 15 Pro.
So there you go.
I think you're good to go.
You're good to go.
Gear-wise.
Get that thing started.
Fire that bad boy up.
What you're going to learn, and this is probably my final tip, right? It's like when you do have guests, it's great to have bullet points and topics in mind. Like, hey, on this episode, we're going to talk about these 3 things.
Have a loose structure.
But like your initial podcast topic idea, I think it's great to have a plan, but you need to be willing to pivot.
Yeah.
And be okay with change, because what you envisioned may not be the best way for it to actually take place. And so we've had that happen a lot of times. We've had guests on, we've told them like, hey, we're going to cover these 3 topics. The conversation takes a turn naturally.
I was going to say, just like any natural conversation in the real world.
And we didn't find a good way to get to that 3rd bullet point, and it just wouldn't have fit, and it worked out great.
Yeah.
So just be willing and be okay with, maybe going off script.
Guess what? Secret information here. I'm going to declassify some information.
Oh.
People don't know what your bullet points are because they don't hear them.
Oh, it's a good point.
So it doesn't matter.
It's a good point.
It doesn't matter.
Great point. So, not only in your episodes with your guests be willing to pivot, but even as a broader topic of like, I want to start a channel on sourdough.
We've been hitting the sourdough a lot lately.
It's popular, and I love sourdough.
I do love sourdough. Well, for this episode specifically, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bullet points, and I've only checked off a few of them, which I've also forgotten to check off some as we go, but we've not got to them all, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You guys didn't know that until just now when I told on us.
Yeah. Understand that they don't know what you didn't talk about.
But they're thankful for what you did talk about.
In most cases, yeah.
We think so. On that note, Jared, speaking of things to talk about, there are some things that our audience can talk about with us that we would greatly appreciate. What are those?
Feedback. Oh, that was my other tip. Dang it.
Okay, that's okay. We can roll that back.
Dang it. No, we'll just keep it going. So the last tip. I don't know how many times I've said that now.
It's a lot of tips.
We need a last tip counter.
Yeah, a lot of tips there. TIPS.
The final tip, accept feedback. Ask for feedback, accept feedback in all forms.
As we've just done.
Yeah, just understand that every piece of feedback, whether you agree with it or not, is someone giving you their opinion.
It's useful information.
Useful information. Now, whether that comes through the YouTube comment section, a review, a rating on another platform, or maybe it comes in person through a friend who's a listener, feedback is good.
Yeah, you need that. You need to hone in your message.
All feedback is good. Yeah. Now, even if you don't think it's a good piece of feedback, maybe they were ugly about it or whatever.
There's some turds out there.
Still.
But turds do provide feedback.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe they had a little bit of merit. Maybe they could have delivered it a little more politely to you. But
hey, there's big turds and there's little turds.
There you go.
In more than one way.
On that note, we're going to get out of here. But not before we ask you guys to leave us a review.
Yeah.
Give us a comment. Let us know what you think. Here's a big one. If you want to start a podcast,
we'd love to help you.
Love to help you. We actually have a free guide down in the show notes on
link
how to get
in description
started.
below.
Give it a download. Let us know if you have any questions. Truly, podcast is fun. Podcasts are fun, and we'd love to help you get yours off the ground.
Here's the hard part, Jared.
We will see you guys in the next one.
He didn't make that very hard. Y'all have a good one.